I'm very pleased that we've got a chance to talk with Rob Whiteman, who I'll introduce in a minute. Rob currently is the chief exec of CIPFA, who GGI are doing some joint work with. Rob came out of the East End of London. He's a Londoner, as you'll hear when he starts speaking. He's a product of state education, council house, and would spend his evenings working in the library, and was a fine singer. Probably is a fine singer still. Felt that was where his future was going to take him. Needed to find a means of employment and went to work in the finance department of his local council. And before you knew it, he was the chief executive of Barking and Dagenham Council rather than treading the boards at Covent Garden. His career took him on from there to the Improvement and Development Agency, which is the IDA, the improvement agency for local authorities. He was then the chief exec of the UK Borders Agency, and some years ago appointed as chief exec of CIPFA. Rob will tell you a few things about CIPFA. It's a fascinating organisation. I didn't realise that half its work is overseas. In NHS terms, I first met Rob when he was a non-executive director at Barking, Havering and Redbridge, let me get this right, University Hospitals NHS Trust. He went on from there to chair the STP in North East London, and he's now the chair of University Hospitals of Dorset NHS Foundation Trust. So, Rob, nice to speak to you.
Very nice to see you too.
A little bit of time, a minute or two talking about CIPFA.
Well, CIPFA's, first of all, very pleased to be working with the Good Governance Institute. Andrew, CIPFA is the only accountancy body in the world that specialises in the public sector. And as you said, Andrew, half our work roughly is in the UK and half our work is overseas. Here in the UK, we train in the National Health Service and in local government, central government, and the firms that support the public sector. And so we train and qualify accountants. And overseas, we work in both the developing world and the developed world. We are a chartered body. We hold a royal charter. We were created in 1885. That wasn't all me. And but we are a registered charity. And so an important part of our work is to promote strong public financial management and good governance around the world. And we particularly at the moment do a lot of, I hope, valuable work in the developing world to help finance departments acquire the skills they need to attract grants from global donor bodies. So I hope that tells you a little bit about CIPFA.
It does indeed, and of course your work at CIPFA brings you very much into contact as a source of counsel for politicians and central government. Now, where do they feel the finance of the NHS is at the moment?
So obviously central government is on the hook before the next election. They want to control public spending. The brief flirtation with Trussonomics had disastrous consequences, and so the government is trying to appear more orthodox in the way that they manage the fiscal position, and with 18 plus months to go before an election, they want to appear credible in the way that they manage the economy and the fiscal position. So yes, productivity can balance the books for them in their view if it's done well. They're conscious that the NHS receives an important part of the national pie, and if productivity, standardization of processes, the learning of good practice, the investment in better processes and more productive means of achieving things, not least through technology and AI and standardization, then obviously productivity can be the balancing item for them. And so they're very keen to promote productivity in order to help balance the books. You don't need me to state the bloody obvious. This is a tough year for NHS finances. We came into the year with some ICBs not being able to balance, and as the year has progressed, we now see that more of that number are unable to balance at the moment. There's a projected deficit for the year that Hartland will be worried about breaking the boat. And all of that, of course, can have a knock-on implication to planning for next year. Productivity can be achieved. It is the balancing item for them that can help to get more for less. However, there's a huge but at this point, Andrew, which is there has to be realism about productivity. I think there are productivity gains to be made in the NHS, just like there are in any organisation, but productivity takes a while to deliver. It comes through, medium-term planning, and the fruits of it come down the line later on. And productivity can't be seen as a short-term balancing item where we make, valiant assumptions about do we have 4 or 5% of SIPs, because actually you end up in the position where productivity is used as a short-term balancing item in order to expediently deal with the books. There is scope for greater productivity gain, but my worry is it gets misused for short-term intervention when actually the undoubted benefits of productivity are a medium-term activity.
Okay, so let's turn then to another instrument which boards need to think about and the centre expects of NHS providers and ICBs, which is to do with financial rigour and discipline and grip and all those rather machismo words that tend to get used. Now, the NHS hasn't had to deal with the very significant financial bleakness that local authorities have for years, and neither is there the legal duty to on NHS boards that there is on local authorities around setting a budget that balance. That having been said, what lessons do you see in your work at CIPFA from sector to sector that are good learning points maybe for the NHS from the world of local authorities?
Thank you. It's a good question. I always tread into this space with caution because I wouldn't want to fall foul of the idea that one is better than the other. I think financial management in local government is strong. I think financial management in the NHS is strong, but very different. And so the question is, what can one learn from the other, even though that there are skills in both? The thing that has helped local government to reduce spending more than any other part of the state in terms of the cuts it had meted out to it is the accountability of budget holders and governance for balancing the books. Now, that's perhaps easier. Local authorities are providing some services which are not as critical as oncology or A&E. But on the other hand, it would be trite to think that there are no lessons from local government either, because actually I can tell you as somebody who sits across the NHS and local government in my career, that balancing the books on children's services and placements and care or adult care can be just as difficult as the problems in terms of outcomes that one sees in the NHS. And the learning point from local government, probably for the whole state, including the NHS, is that because there are greater degrees of devolution in local government, where there is this quite unique arrangement where in effect local government is not underwritten by the Treasury, It has capital freedoms to borrow, to invest in its future, but basically can't be underwritten by central government. But actually, that does create a huge amount of accountability, and budget holders and those charged with governance feel responsible for balancing the books and having to take necessary actions, both for the medium term and for the short term, which I think one can pass on to other organisations, because that's undoubtedly the strength of local government.
Okay, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I was then going to turn on to the question of in a context of systems, are the financial accountability or the financial control of individual NHS trusts, is that now an irrelevant or meaningless concept? And particularly thinking about the capital and the revenue and the ICB taking on more capital responsibilities that heretofore had been with NHS Foundation Trusts. So in a system context, if you're sitting on the board of an individual NHS provider, are your financial controls now meaningless?
No. I mean, it's a good question. I think organisations are as accountable as ever to balance their books and their budget whilst providing high quality services as best as possible. But there is an extra dynamic to that, and that is that we're working through ICBs and system in order to seek to invest in prevention and medium-term productivity. So all those things I said earlier on about how do we equip ourselves with the workforce that has the skills that we need, how do we invest in IT and AI, how do we have really effective pathways for dealing with delayed discharges between local authorities and the NHS. All of these things will in time benefit from the creation of ICBs. And for those of us on a provider board, we are as much a part of the ICB and trying to do that set of things as we are the board members of our own organisation. But this is not a binary choice between the two. Do I manage effective control of the budget of my organisation, or do I effectively now do those things through the ICB? The thing is, we do both, don't we? And we exist in a complex environment where the ICB is trying to give a framework to that complexity. How do we work with local government? How do we invest in workforce, social care, prevention, public health, mental health? And that's a good thing for a provider trust. The two are not at loggerheads with each other. Actually, the two are completely sympathetic to each other. We must provide the budget for which we must control the budget for which we are responsible. And I don't think there's any lack of expectation from NHSE or region, or indeed through the ICB, that we failed to do so. But now we have the opportunity to try and paint with a broader brush than any one organisation can on affecting the medium term. I guess, thinking through what I said earlier, ICBs only came into effect on the 1st of July last year. This is a reform that probably takes a decade to see whether or not it succeeds. So I do, my bugbear in life is probably there is productivity to be had. There is prevention and allocative efficiency to be had over a period of time. But in the meantime, services are as they are, and we shouldn't be forced to set overly heroic budgets with assumptions on productivity that actually can't be delivered in the short term. And I think that's the difficult place that trusts and ICBs are in at the moment, that it's an exercise in balancing the books, probably as much as an exercise of prudent financial planning for the medium term about what do we need to invest in, and how do we deliver it?
Well, we're definitely seeing that. And I suppose what strikes me is that if you talk about something like risk management and the BAF, and people are starting to develop system BAFs, so they're looking at things like financial risks, and they're thinking about the risks they hold that now are in the control of others. Well, actually, what ICBs have done is made those transparent. They're always there.
Yep.
It was always a collective endeavour. It's always been complicated, but the internal market had a long shadow, and it overemphasised, I think, the independence of organisations. And so I think
Yep.
You're absolutely correct about that in your analysis. But let's just end with where we began, with the politicians, because it struck me that there will be an election in within the next 22 months, maybe a bit sooner. What do you think the finance narrative for the NHS is going to be as we go through this year and into an election year?
A lot of pressure, so it keeps the show on the road. You don't need me to say this. Everybody watching this is going to be experience intense pressure, possibility of burnout, a very frenetic environment where organisations are trying to deal with significant backlogs of work that built up during the COVID crisis, but at the moment very difficult to eat into those backlogs because of workforce shortages and of course managing industrial action. So intellectually, everybody wants to play for the medium term and think about how do we make the reforms that are in place, such as integrated care boards, how do we make those a success? But I think that's going to get easily crowded out, Andrew. I think the political narrative is survival, trying to not break the boat because they've got other calls on expenditure. They're going to have to put some more money into the NHS. I would be amazed if there isn't some further money as yet unannounced before the election. But for those of us charged with the governance of organisation, we can't take that as a likelihood, and we have to try and manage with the resources that we have in the short term to the best of our ability. I hope what we don't have is some sort of impugning of NHS management for not being able to balance the books in the short term in the way that's required. It strikes me that everybody is working incredibly hard. Frontline staff are working hard. Managers are working hard. Everybody is working very hard, and it's not easy because possibly, more than at any time in my career, I think workforces has been a problem or risk as resources. There'll be lots of people watching this that have budgets in certain areas, but they can't recruit to those roles. And clearly we have a very significant workforce challenge for the NHS, where we now need to bring people back into the workforce, or we need to bring new people into the workforce, or we need to recruit from overseas, or we need to recruit from parts of the country that can generate more workforce. But that I don't think that challenge has ever been that significant as it is now for people, and that's where organisations are really trying to manage how do I develop my workforce in a period of time that can underpin services. And they're just going to have to deal with an awful lot of short-term stuff at the moment, because politicians will try to avoid, understandably, putting more money in before the election because of the problems that developed during that brief Truss era where if the UK government appeared not to be able to balance the books, things got appreciably worse. So we will be under a lot of pressure to balance the books. And the narrative, I hope, is a constructive one, that we're proud of the NHS and its track record of delivering healthcare for the last 70 odd years. I guess we all have a slight worry that in this age of populism, it can be easy to act as if the NHS is facing all of these problems because of poor management or poor leadership or lack of vision. I don't think any of those things are true. I think the NHS is well led. I think a lot of individual organisations are up against the wall because it's a tough gig at the moment for people, and the narrative for us is to say we can keep the show on the road, but we need more medium-term certainty about our resources. We need to be able to invest meaningfully in transformation and higher productivity, and we need to rebuild morale because certainly morale has taken a real knock in the last year or two.
It is indeed a tough gig, and I can think of few hotter seats at the moment than one round an NHS board table. Look, thank you ever so much for your time. Much appreciated as always, and looking forward to our next year of working together.
Thanks very much indeed.
Cheers.